I returned from a work trip and found my wife standing in the rain. I have driven that highway back from the airport more times than I can count. But I had never once pulled into my own driveway and found my wife standing outside in the November rain with no coat, no umbrella, and an expression on her face that told me something had gone very, very wrong before I had even turned off the engine. Welcome back to Eric's Revenge Story. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You are going to love it here. My name is Barnaby Holt, and I am 59 years old. I am a senior logistics coordinator for a regional freight company based out of Chilliwack, British Columbia, which means I spend a considerable amount of my professional life making sure that things arrive where they are supposed to be, when they are supposed to be there, in the condition they were promised. I am very good at this. I have been doing it for 26 years. My wife Miriam has been doing the harder job of being married to me for 28 years, and she has never once complained, which I find remarkable and also slightly suspicious. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you are watching this from. I would genuinely love to know. Life in Chilliwack was quiet in the way that good things are quiet. Miriam taught music at the elementary school 2 kilometers from our house. I came home most evenings by 6. We had a cedar porch we were both very proud of, a garden that Miriam kept and I occasionally stood near while holding a coffee, and a house on Hodgins Avenue that we had owned outright since 2019, paid off, ours. The title sitting in a filing cabinet in my home office like a very boring trophy I cherished completely. Our son Devin was 31. He worked in commercial insurance. He had been married to Rochelle for 3 years. Rochelle was 35, which meant she was 4 years older than Devin, which nobody in the family found interesting except Rochelle, who found it relevant enough to mention occasionally and without obvious reason. She was sharp and organized and always seemed to be calculating something just behind her eyes. I gave her the benefit of the doubt for longer than I should have. I am built that way. Miriam had fewer doubts and expressed them more clearly, which is one of the reasons I married her. The warning signs had been accumulating for about a year before that November. Small things, the kind you file away and then feel foolish about later. Rochelle had started asking questions about the house that had no apparent reason behind them. She asked once at a family dinner in February whether we had ever considered downsizing. We had not. She asked in April whether the house was in both our names or just mine. I said both, which was true. She nodded and changed the subject. In August, she mentioned almost casually that she and Devin were outgrowing their rental. I said that was a normal problem for a young couple to have. She looked at me in a way that suggested she did not consider it her problem to solve. Devin started calling more often that fall. He called on a Sunday evening in September and asked how the property taxes worked on a paid-off home. I told him. He thanked me. I hung up and sat for a moment and thought about that question longer than was probably necessary. Then I told myself I was reading into things and went back to my crossword. I mention this only because the crossword was going very well and I did not want to lose momentum. I have no other defense. Rochelle had also started making suggestions about the spare bedroom whenever she visited. Little comments about storage, about what a shame it was to have the space sitting unused. Miriam told me in October that Rochelle had asked to see the basement. Miriam had said no. Miriam did not elaborate on how she had said it, but based on her expression when she told me, I suspect Rochelle received the message with reasonable clarity. The work trip came up suddenly in the second week of November. A freight coordination meeting in Edmonton that required 2 nights. I had made the trip before and there was nothing unusual about it. I packed on a Tuesday evening. Miriam walked me to the door on Wednesday morning, told me to eat an actual meal and not just airport sandwiches, and I told her I made no promises. She waved me off. That was the last normal morning for a little while. I landed back in Abbotsford on Friday evening just after 7. The drive from the airport to Chilliwack takes about 40 minutes on a clear run. It was raining the way November rains in the Fraser Valley, which is to say steadily and without any particular apology about it. I pulled onto Hodgins Avenue at 7:42 and I saw Miriam standing on the front walkway, no coat, handbag on her shoulder, standing in the rain looking at our front door. I stopped the car in the middle of the street for a moment before I thought to pull into the driveway. I got out. I said her name. She turned to me and I could see that her jaw was set in the way it gets when she is holding something together by sheer willpower. She pointed at the door without speaking. There was a note taped to it, handwritten, folded once. I walked up and read the first 3 lines. That was enough. The note said the house now belonged to Devin and Rochelle. It said Barnaby's name. It said Miriam should make arrangements. There was a lock on the door I had never seen before. I tried my key. It did not fit. My key did not fit my own front door. I read 3 words of that note. Then I took out my phone. The 3 words I said were, "Pamela, it is Barnaby." And then I waited 2 seconds and said 4 more because the situation seemed to warrant them. Pamela Duchesne has been my property lawyer since 2011. She is 53 years old, has the organizational instincts of a military general, and speaks in complete sentences that contain exactly the words necessary and no additional ones. When I explained what I was looking at, she was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "I need you to photograph the note, photograph the lock, and photograph your wife standing outside that door." She said, "Do not touch the door again." She said, "Do not call your son yet." She said, "I will call you back in 20 minutes. She called back in 17. I want to pause here and tell you about my friend Gordon Reese, because he is essential to this story and also to my general survival as a person. Gordon and I have known each other since we were both 22 years old and working the same loading dock in Abbotsford. He is now a project supervisor, father of 3, and the only man alive who can make me laugh in the middle of a genuinely terrible evening. I called him from the car while Miriam sat in the passenger seat with a blanket I keep in the back and a coffee from the Tim Hortons 2 blocks away. Gordon answered on the second ring. He always answers on the second ring. I believe he considers it a personal standard. I told him what had happened. There was silence. Then he said, "She left a note on the door, a handwritten note?" I said yes. He said, "Did she think you were going to read that and just go find a hotel?" I said, "Apparently." He said, "Barnaby, that is the boldest thing I have ever heard in my life." He said it with a kind of genuine astonishment that I found briefly comforting. Then he said, "What do you need?" And I told him I needed Miriam to stay at his place for the night and I needed him to not make any jokes about it until morning. He said, "Deal on the first part." He made no promises about the second. Miriam went to Gordon and his wife Carol's house that night. Carol met her at the door with tea and did not ask a single question until Miriam was ready to answer them. I have always liked Carol enormously. Pamela had spent those 17 minutes well. She had reached the duty clerk for emergency injunctive relief, pulled our title documentation which was registered solely in my name following the refinancing in 2019. Something I had honestly forgotten the details of until that moment, and confirmed that no legal instrument existed giving Devon or Rochelle any claim to the property whatsoever. None. A handwritten note taped to a door is not a deed. This is apparently something that needs to be stated out loud on occasion. By 9:45 that evening, a court-authorized locksmith had restored access to the property, and a trespass order had been formally issued against both Rochelle and Devon, preventing either of them from setting foot on or near the property without facing immediate legal consequence. The original locksmith Rochelle had hired, and I give him no credit for judgment but some credit for record keeping, had left a receipt in the mailbox. It had his business name on it. Pamela noted this with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has seen a great deal of human foolishness and is no longer surprised by any of it. Devon called at 10:17. I let it go to voicemail. Rochelle called at 10:22. I let that go too. I called Pamela the following Monday and told her I wanted to restructure the estate documents entirely. She said I anticipated that. She had already drafted 3 options. We met Tuesday morning at her office on Yale Road and went through every document. The house was moved into a trust structured in a way that Devon could not access or claim without surviving both Miriam and me and fulfilling conditions that Rochelle specifically had no pathway through. Pamela reviewed the final version on Friday afternoon, set it down, and said with the particular dryness she reserves for moments like this, "Rochelle will find this very educational." I said I hope so. She said I know so. Devon came to see me in person 3 weeks later. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and he looked tired and younger than 31 in a way that was hard to watch. He said Rochelle had told him it was just a conversation starter, that she had not actually expected it to work, that she thought I would come home and we would all just talk about it. I looked at him for a long moment and I said, "Devon, your wife locked your mother out of her own house in the rain in November and left a note claiming ownership of property she has no legal relationship to whatsoever. That is not a conversation starter. That is a significant decision with significant consequences." He did not say anything. He looked at the table. I gave him a coffee because he is still my son and I am not made of stone. Rochelle and Devon separated 8 months later. I do not take satisfaction in that. I take no satisfaction in it at all. He came back around slowly, the way people do when the fog clears. We are finding our way back. It takes time. The Saturday after everything was resolved, Miriam walked back into the house and stood in the front hallway for a moment. She looked at the new lock on the door, the one Pamela's locksmith had installed. She said, "Is that a schlag?" I said yes. She said, "Good." Then she walked into the kitchen and put on the kettle, and I stood in the doorway watching her and thought, there she is. There is Miriam. She made tea. She made it in the blue pot she has had since before we were married, and she poured 2 cups and set one in front of me without asking if I wanted it because she already knew. She sat down across from me and she wrapped both hands around her mug and she said, "Barnaby, I want new locks on every door." I said I already did that. She looked at me over the rim of her cup and said, "Good." Then she said, "I also want a new deadbolt on the garden gate." I said, "Miriam, there is no gate on the garden." She said, "I know. I want one." I pulled out my phone and called a hardware store.